and then we'll leave time for question and answers. Just a reminder to keep your audio on mute throughout the entire session, and to type your questions into the chat near the end. If you type it too early on and there's other chat, I might lose track of it. But let's keep the questions closer to the end of the lecture, and then we'll try to make our way through as many of them as we can. So, Nate?
I am happy to have questions throughout the session.
Okay.
So perfect. Any interruption is very welcome.
Perfect.
This will be a session of disjunction, of layering, of segmenting, of a collage of conversation. And so I really look to kind of a more call and response approach to conversation and to presentation.
Perfect.
Please disrupt.
Disruption is required.
Disruption is required.
Okay. All right. So I'd like to give a brief introduction to Nate, but I don't think I'm able to give a brief introduction to him and his work and my relationship to him. You know, his work, you know, his work is really quite far-ranging and far-reaching, and as he described it, it's a powerful, immediate, and tangible response to the call for more Black presence on faculties. Yeah, it's sorry, I'm getting confused in my notes here. So first I should say that Nate and I—
This is one of those times where you can interject.
Interject and interrupt me, because I don't know what I'm trying to say here. So yeah, so first I should say, yeah, I wanted to say thanks to Michael Speaks. That's what I wanted to start, to bring him, who brought Nate here to the School of Architecture at Syracuse. And I wanted to say that he took a really big step, a really great series of steps in response to many of what we were all asking for to change the kind of paradigm in architectural schools. And a lot of people talked about it. Michael did quite a number of things about it. So I wanted to thank him for bringing Nate here to teach at the school and to also lecture today. So Nate and I were at Cornell together back in the mid-90s. Nate actually graduated before I got there. But when I did get to Cornell, his thesis presentation was already legendary at that time. And people had been talking about it for a couple years and kept talking about it for a few more years. And it really was the beginning of this conversation around hip hop architecture. And he rightfully claims the title of Godfather of hip hop architecture, because he was really the first person to officially use that term in any capacity and base his entire 1993 thesis on that notion. And the idea of sampling, layering, and repeating has continued to resonate throughout all of his work after then. His work since then has expanded into broader areas encompassing the entire Afro-diasporic condition. And it's gone into many areas of research and practice. He has a thriving art practice, as well as a design practice, where he does projects in and around New York City. So he's no longer just limited to professional practice in architecture, but also exhibiting his work in many galleries, not just in the continental US, but on both coasts, in LA, in New York, but also globally in places like Finland and Switzerland and Singapore. His work is now, and his collaborations go beyond just the African diaspora or many aspects of the African diaspora beyond the United States into areas across the Caribbean, South America, and Western Africa. We're really lucky to have him here this semester teaching a visiting critic studio along with Ifoma Ebo. And that studio is focused around pioneer homes here in Syracuse, New York, but is looking at the broader history of the Black experience in Syracuse and how that has been disrupted multiple times, and how people have been placed and displaced and marginalized quite often in this city. And so that studio is taking quite a deep look at it. I've had a chance to look at some of the work in that studio, and I commented to both of them that they're doing a studio that I tried to do a year ago, and they're doing it much more in depth and much more intentionally. So I'm really happy to see the work that's happening in that studio. I look forward to what it turns out at the end. I'm lucky to have been invited on the final panel, and I'm sure, knowing the caliber of Nate's work and the rigor that he demands from his students, that work is going to be something to really stand very solid. So that's about all I'll say for now.
No, keep going. You good.
That's
I really
all I'll
like
say
this.
for
This is a
now.
good start.
I told you I'm going to try to keep it as brief as I can. I should mention that his work was also featured in the exhibition that I did at the Center for Architecture in 2018. And in a couple of areas, I was able to convince him over several weeks and months to find and dig up the work that he did in 1993 for his thesis. And some more recent work in his art practice was also featured in that show. And he was also gracious enough to lecture there. So if this lecture is as good as that one, then we're definitely in for a treat. So without further ado, I'm happy to hear from Nate. Take it away.
Thank you, Sekou. That was wonderful. That was a wonderful introduction, and you kind of set the bar a little bit. You could have just toned that down a little bit, but extended in terms of time. I think in reality, the reason that I'm even here right now and talking to you has to do very much about my personal commitment and just my background in hip hop, and that it's really my understanding of that, how that has grown and expanded to other studies. And so I was obsessed, not even obsessed, I was really looking to find my place within the world of architecture and architecture design. And there are many things that I saw and I understood, and I realized that there are many things in terms of what became the both contemporary and modern architecture and art was completely informed by many things that were translations of African art. So just me looking at art and architecture and images and realizing that this idea of translation and transformation started from a certain place, I was able to at some point start to look at it in ways that I was digesting things, which was through the lens of a DJ. That is one of my art forms. It's one of my creative forms. And so my starting point had been a place of sampling and layering, and well, actually just layering and understanding what rhythm is and what space is and how we move through space and time through sound. But just the idea of how do we DJ art and architecture. And so I kind of want to look at that first through sound and visuals. I realized that these are things that I've been looking at and has developed actually after that what Sekou explained from my thesis in school. It grew to something larger where I figured that, or in expanding my research, realized that that it needed contextualization and that it was a part of continuity that had to do with a greater understanding and vision of the African diaspora and the Black Atlantic, and that there's a lot of different hip hop moments. And one of them was the Harlem Renaissance, and it has to do with jazz, or one of them was the Northern Migration, or one of them was these things. And that there's a continuity in the way that things are created, designed, and expressed. And so a lot of my work has to do with African diasporic creative practice, process, and theory. And so that's what I look at. And my research practice is so much about going to different communities, whether it is Via Maya in Dominican Republic, or Palenque in Colombia, or Guerrero in Mexico, or Luisa in Puerto Rico, or the Gulagichi research and studies that I was so happy to discuss with Rough Work Studio, Scott Ruff. But there's these different enclaves that exist and happen that I look at the different connectivity and continuity that happens. I'm going to show you something a little bit not polished, but worthy of discussion.
There's a mouse.
Where's this? Where's the lecture? Oh,
You got New York too. They can't see me, can they?
no, but you see, I have the video off. See that? Video off.
Hey, Nate, I'm not sure if your audio is on.
Yeah.
We can't hear the audio.
Just Nate, you just have to, when you enable computer, when you sort of share screen, you have to check the enable computer button, just so you know. You're muted right now, by the way. Nate, sorry, we can't hear you. I'm going to unmute you.
All right.
Here we go.
To share the sound, I need to.
Yeah, so you have to reshare, I think reshare your screen. So I think you have to stop sharing your screen. And then when you start sharing again, you have to check the enable computer sound.
Let's try this again. I'm sorry, just 1 second, please. We're about to roll up. We got this.
Nate, if you want to chat, let me know.
Andy,
Yeah, hey.
hey, you have my number?
Do you want me to can you look on your Zoom status bar and unshare the screen? Or it might be at the very top of your screen. You want to stop the screen share. Okay.
Got it.
And
Okay,
now
okay. All
share
right.
the screen again.
Uh-huh.
And then at the bottom is that little checkbox, share my
Oh,
computer
we talked
sound.
about this. Share computer sound.
Yep.
Optimize screen, blah, 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 blah. All right, are we ready?
Yeah, then share and then try play again. Yep.
Okay. Let's try one more time. Oh, this is not working. It's not working. Be right back. It's gonna be like 5 more seconds. Where it is. You don't even have a saved room. It's quite possible that I just deleted a presentation, which is okay. I think that what's most important about the way that I approach design and I approach art, we can discuss, and then we can look at some specific pieces that are separate from the presentation that almost happened. So I definitely approach all work in an African diasporic means of continuity or understanding of continuity. And a lot of that has to do with signification and signifying. In part, for me, the largest bits are issues and understandings of sampling and layering and repetition. Within the context of space and how we move through space and time. So for any given space, we can begin to look at how we engage space and what the rhythms of space are, and then also kind of a diasporic approach of signifying within that, and often that means a certain series of layering, and then also syncopation therein. So that means slipping between the beats, and that we understand the beats. So if we're looking at a room that has a series of 15 to 16 beats or rhythm of such, that we're understanding and occupying those spaces, and then moving in between them. There is an importance that comes from certain layers of spirituality that for me are huge in the way that I occupy space and materiality. Yes, thank you. That really deal with spirituality. So at the crossroads, and that's something that is what I hope to speak about, is the intersection. At the center of the intersection are the warriors, is Alegua, Papa Ba, Papa Big Ba, Mafere Fum, that we look at these things in material, and that we have the opportunity to look at the intersection and intervention. This is a huge thing for what we're dealing with in the studio that we have right now for the Syracuse class, that we're looking at what are these intersections and interventions. These things can be looked at from traditional spiritual base, where you have the warriors that are at the intersection, where you have I'm sorry, people writing things at the same time, so I will stop looking and I'm going to try and finish sentences. So there's different rhythms that happen within space, and so it could be structure, it could be material, it could be a lot of different things, and that we can look to see how do we intercede with those things, how do we interact with those, with the materiality and with the structure, and then with the spirit of what that means. The 4 moments of the sun, which was the title of this, what was supposed to be this lecture, has to do with a Central African understanding of making the universe. That we are, 1 moment of the sun is when you're born, and then it raises up and becomes the next section. That it's a cyclical understanding of life and how we move through space, and even how we move with the sun. So at the height of the sun, it's when we're at our strength, when we're at our highest point, and then that we will descend and then go into the afterlife, and that we connect with the ancestors, and that they also inform us and hold our hands and move through space in that way. At a certain point, that starts to talk about the difference between how we view space in terms of either linearly or cyclically. But there's an overlap, because there's a cyclical, lineal overlap of that, and that's something that has come to the Americas. It has manifested in the way that people occupy space and the way that they show space and mark space. Many times this is about marking the space of the spirit, and this is one way to understand how we occupy space, or when you're in a zone, or that there's a space that is defined, and how that, what is the definition of space as an architect or as an artist, and what does that mean? I try and occupy these themes and syncopate these themes. I try to signify these things rhythmically and arrhythmically within the way that I create space. Often this is starting from a place of music, and then becomes visual art, and then after that I can usually finally find my way to becoming some kind of architectural, archival, archaeological conversation. The spaces that I've had the opportunity to do these researches have been throughout the Americas, and I guess actually also in India, for example, with the city communities that are in West India, and also West African communities in Singapore and Malaysia that exist. But it's really, my research is, what did you take there? How are you doing it? And how does that work? And how are you combining or layering or collaging these images, textures, structures? And to me, that's a useful language and knowledge to have within the practice of architecture or art in any sense, because we're always taking our narrative and our story to places and spaces, and translating these things and finding the overlap and then the disconnect. There's something that's very architectural, but also very hip hop in terms of occupying or appropriating space and seam, whether it is people breakdancing on cardboard or using what is understood as a break in music, or occupying or appropriating a moving train or a wall. But it's something that has happened and continues to happen during and before, actually before the Northern Migration it was used within quilting extensively, where messaging was happening using the seam and these things that were put outside and occupying the seam of courtyard and porch. So these different layers and ideas of what's inside and what's outside.
Show some work.
Yeah, so now I'm going to show some work.
You sound like
this specific piece references occupying the ground, occupying just like unoccupied or what the seams are in the street, in the sidewalk, and had to do with bearing and understanding of death and what does that mean and how that can have both spiritual and street implications. There was ideas of or hopes of something, and this goes back to this idea of embodying hip hop, where there's these moments in New York and in Harlem where we are occupying sidewalk and reinventing them. My reinvention or my intervention to the sidewalk had to do specifically with creating these different little DJ booths that could happen as street happenings, as environmental or neighborhood moments that would just appear as you walk by during the daytime and then glow upward during the night. I'm just going to show some work. This piece is looking at rhythms of the city. I'm sorry, not the city, of Manhattan specifically. I believe I titled this Crosswords, something about crosswords, crossing soul, crossing time and space and place, whatever. I don't really know what I call this one, but it started from a crossword puzzle that I blew up huge and was looking at just what are the specific rhythms of where and how that could occupy space within a conversation of archiving historical, architectural, and African diasporic artistic language and layering those things together. So crosswords also means a cross in terms of bad words or mean words, or that I'm crossing you, that we cross lines. And so I was looking at the crossword puzzle in that way and what that could mean. And then how that means, oh, crosswords, cross worlds. That was the title of the piece. And so that's what this was an investigation of. And how do we move in and out of that? There's some paintings that I sampled that were both my own, but also including the works of Elizabeth Catlett, but also the paintings that Corb was doing based on his collection. And I'm sorry, first and foremost, there's like huge graffiti artists that are referenced here that I kind of copied their work, but also and Emory Douglas, the artist for the Black Panthers. So huge importance, but also the work of, for me, looking at Corb's work while I was a student at Cornell, even though this was probably 40 years later, maybe 50 or 60 years later. But the work that combines his paintings post his exploration and collection of African art and sculpture. This piece is looking at a project that was done looking at the crossroads and the understanding thereof of Legba, Legua, the spirit of the crossroads, for a project and show and series of, I guess, 64 or 84 for the Museum of Contemporary African Diasporic Art, Mokala. This goes back to the conversation towards hip hop and occupying the spaces of seam and the rhythms thereof. The proposal was that there would be these kind of almost inverted gathering objects. This one was to invade or have an interjection or occupy and appropriate the space underneath the elevated train on Broadway between 127th and 137th Street. This project was more about semiotics, which was in Estonia and Tartu, in Iceland and Helsinki, but it was based on that there's a woman that wrote was that there's someone who received a certain amount of music, and then she gave a bunch of artists and architects her description of what was going on. This person was a choreographer, and that this is something that we all just pass on back and forth. Within this single piece, there are ideas of both Central African and West African ideas of how we all fit in space. Within the center, you might see a post or a tree, which is very much about Mayumbi. But there's a lot of different things that happen in different ways, but it's about occupying space within these different rhythms and opening three specific areas and ideas and concepts as it opens within the way that the person is describing. This is 64 panels. This is one of 64. There's a lot of work that I do. This is in relation to a commission and works through the AMR in Switzerland, which is it's basically the center for improvisational artwork and music, and also for a music video. But there's, I believe, 40 of these panels. They speak to at that time, there was a huge criticism on what and how artists were influenced by the development and theory in space of Switzerland in and of itself. This was, most of the artists that I know were either Geneva or Lausanne, but this is one of the pieces that were worked on. or that I developed work on. And now I'm just going to show, well, that's another music piece. A lot of these pieces are actually quite musical. This piece I had the pleasure of working on with Bekan Geofas. That was a series based on how the sun moves through 14th Street and the interventions that we were proposing. So at this point, I'm going to keep pushing buttons, but I invite Professor Cook to step in and ask any questions that you have. Or not. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right. All right, let's talk. Psycho.
Okay, let's do it. So one of the things, sorry that you had all that technical issues, by the way.
I don't know how that happened, but it did. I
But,
think
well,
I might have deleted everything. So
you asked for
Sorry?
disruption and you got disruption.
I
right?
got disruption. I got what I asked for. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Usually disruption means the spirits are stepping in. So
spirits are stepping in. And part of the fun of it is just seeing how, the freestyling ethos can work even in this new technological era and in this space or this, like in this format, like we're all used to this format of this is a lecture, it's like a really formal thing, and there's a kind of expectation of delivering a certain level of content in a certain kind of discourse. But at the essence, we're really trying to get to know somebody's work and how they and how the work gets translated into different disciplines, right? And one of the fascinating things to me about your work is that I see this really beautiful consistency between how you were thinking back 25 years ago and how you're thinking now, and how you think about things from an architectural lens versus how you think about it in an art lens, right? So, can you talk a bit more about the connection between those worlds?
I don't actually see a difference, and I feel like the research speaks to that. I don't see the difference between I see the experimentation that happens in the art world. I feel that I don't have rules when or I have less rules to experiment with these rhythms and this layering that happens when I play and practice within the art world. I practice within an architectural world. So one experiment one example of this is there's a great project that was, who's doing that one?
That's me. I'm showing. Okay. Just keep talking. I'm just showing some.
Okay, you can do that. That's fine. Make it bigger though. But so an example, architectural example, I just brought up yesterday in class was that there was a couple, and they were both like, one was coming from a very European place and another one was coming from Korea. And so we were looking at what are these textures and rhythms and structure that they both have. And so a lot of this is kind of cultural. There's an archival and cultural investigation that I am deeply invested in. And so for them, they were able to meet basically at the post. I know the post from the Potomita, which unfortunately you didn't get to hear about, but basically the idea of a central spiritual post and how does that become structural, right? And so for them, for the one partner, she has a history of understanding that there's a traditional post that is in a space, and then it has to be there, and it has to be unmended. It has to be very just a raw post. And then for her partner, for him, he came from a background where there was Joaquin and Boaz as these posts, and then we were understanding posts, and then from there we could structure the idea of singular and double posts, and then how that moves through a space vertically when we were structuring, you know, 4-story brownstone in Brooklyn. But for me, it's kind of understanding people's rhythms and their backgrounds and their traditions and looking at what that means. I know that, or I understand that I do this definitely in a hip hop or a DJ, I should say, more importantly, background in the way that I form space. So, you know, we've all seen buildings that stick out in the middle of nowhere and they make absolutely no sense. And then we see the ones that it's a smooth transition. And so I use those musical conversations and language and investigations of culture. And it happens first in art, usually, and then I'm able to translate and transcend into architectural language and ideas about connection and ideas about siting, placement.
So a lot of people talk, you know, are interested in how music overlaps with architecture. And a lot of times when I talk, I get the question about, you know, architecture and music. And, you know, I have to really separate hip hop as music from hip hop as culture. And I think what you're doing, you're talking about not just reflecting music in architecture, but culture in architecture and in your artwork. And you're talking about it from the perspective of a DJ. And for me, a DJ is somebody who knows culture and musical history much in a much more deeply layered and even technical way than most other musicians. So can you talk more about your history of being a DJ and how that the kind of thought processes that a DJ goes through, how that influences the work itself as well?
Start the question again, because there's something you said at the beginning that I want to touch on.
Well,
Unless
it was about music,
that.
because it was really shifting it from a conversation about music and architecture to a conversation about the mindset of a DJ. All
right, so we could start with that.
Yeah.
There is an archival knowledge that's necessary, and I think it speaks to architecture. I think that no matter where you're working and what you're doing, you need to actually understand the culture of the people and what those rhythms are and how that manifests. My personal experience is playing as many instruments and getting my hands on as many instruments as possible, but then also understanding what are the seams. Something that's really important in terms of African diasporic creation is not just the understanding of datum and rhythm, but also actively disrupting them. And so in hip hop, that is activated within the seam of the scratch, right? And so in dance, it is the break. Robert Farris Thompson did amazing studies on what the break looks like and how that manifests in conversation, in poetry, in tango specifically, in mambo, and like there's all these different things where what happens is that we understand and manifest an understanding of rhythm and datum, and then find ways to disrupt it. Within my collages, you'll see that there's definitely pattern, there's rhythm, and then there's also disruption of these things. The pieces that you're showing right now it's all one piece actually. So these are just little moments of something that develops, like you just see a series of, or a pattern, rhythm of bodies, space.
I mean, I think these are fascinating to me because when I first started seeing them pop up on Instagram earlier, I was fascinated because there's one kind of visceral thing in seeing these Black faces and Black bodies in very westernized clothing. Like they're colonized, obviously. And then there's this circle, this kind of halo that is a theme that shows up in Renaissance paintings as well. But the circle around their head that is also this kind of shining of their cultural heritage, their cultural roots, you know, the tapestry, the fabric, that's part of that. And even just like the hand-drawn lines on top of that, giving it a more architectural edge. I think these are really powerful series. And to me, I see it as really consistent with your trajectory or your thought process about the work of a DJ, right? And to me, another part of the work of a DJ is really a kind of an excavator of cultural history, a kind of keeper of cultural knowledge. So
I think it's closer to the keeper.
Yeah,
I think you hit it with the keeper. There's an archival moment. There's an archival thing that happens. You're saying that this is the thing that's important. Those halos, which have expanded and contracted in my pieces, have to do with celebrating the moments and points of activation and power, basically. These are places of empowerment that are activated in different ways. So if you see, for example, in this picture, or in this image, there's the circle around the hands, which is the activation, the empowerment that these people can do whatever they want to do. These images are of regular people within the Americas. I find it fascinating that for you in your description that you're seeing, and this is not in any way a criticism, but I'm really curious about how people see that this set of people and set of images are seen as Western clothes or non-Western, and what that means, or European, I think you said, right?
Yes.
When,
Western, you're colonized. Colonized is what I said. Yeah, that they're you know, just the clothing is a kind of colonizing tool, right?
I think there's an overlap that happens, and so I really love mixing very traditional diasporic image and textile within and without what is and was possibly colonized.
Yeah.
That it is a collage, that we are all collage, that we all are in these multiple spaces at the same time.
Yeah.
That it's not binary in any way.
So one last thing I'll touch on before I go to some of the questions that were coming in from the audience, is that this collector or this keeper of cultural knowledge, or as DJ Spooky describes it, they're griots, right? Like DJs are ultimately griots.
Right.
And the griot is the West African tradition.
You saw what he said? You saw what he did with Cheryl's Wingsy One?
I did not know.
All right. You need to check out. He's got some architectural things. But
yeah, I know. I mean, I read his book. His book is really quite fascinating.
I know him from the city, this guy.
But yeah, but so, you know, the desire to bring up culture and make it a really key part of your work, to me, seems almost completely antithetical to what we learned in architecture school as undergrads at Cornell, where in that moment in time, it was really about stripping away any cultural identity within your work. It was more about, okay, what, you know, how does it work in terms of its form? How does it work in terms of its light? How do you move through it? What is the experience? What is the partie? What is all of these things? You know, does it constrain itself to the grid or defy or have a slightly different grid, right? Is it white or is it off-white? You know,
I think that it's really important to be able to have that kind of conversation. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important to first understand that the ability to have those kinds of conversations where we are stepping back and looking at what's the essence of what the image is or what the space is, right? So for me, if you look, there's a lot of construction lines that are always happening, right? I line up everything that I do because I would love to with each thing that I do, remove the lines that I have and understand the spirit and essence of that piece. And I think that in a way that speaks to what you're talking about in terms of what we've learned since you and I went to the same school of architecture, that we understand the essence and of what the piece is and what it means and how it speaks. These are actually similar to what is a punto riscalo, or what is a veve, or what is a patipemba of a space, any space that we're drawing the spirit and lines of. This is the action, this is what it means. It's understood as traditional, and I don't know if you want to use the word colonized or Western, or I don't really care, but there would not be that thing if we don't take a step back and look at the way that I think I guess at first it started happening in African art. And that's what informs and informed collage art. It's what informed and informs sculpture, all sculpture.
Yeah.
So contemporary work that was informed from this place moved in this way. And so like there would be no Gasso, there would be no Brancusi, there would be no Corp without these things. And so I'm kind of looking both forward and backward. Scott Ruff, the great professor, talks about Afro-surrealism as opposed to Afro-futurism. And I love that conversation. I feel like I'm kind of occupying a space that's more moving both backwards and forwards, just like, the DJ Scotch.
Yeah. So I see a question in here, a couple questions in here from Amanda Williams, but I think she's on camera. Maybe Amanda, you can put yourself back on camera and unmute yourself and ask the question live.
What's good, cousin?
Cousin. I'll try to condense my questions since I rambled on in the chat.
Oh no, keep going, keep rambling, please.
No, I just think, just for context for people watching, so Nate and I were in school together, but his thesis that Sekou referenced and he referenced was really pivotal for me in a lot of ways. But in that 20 plus years, I don't think I've ever thought of you as a synesthete. And now I think that's what you are. Like just hearing you talk and the way you move between the terminologies that have different meanings in these disciplines, but you found a way to fuse them. Seems to make sense to me. So when Sekou asked this question about art and architecture, I hate that question, by the way. Not that I hate Sekou, but I hate that question because I can't parse myself. I can't be like, today I'm a Black woman and a third Chicagoan and a fourth short person. And, so the movement between the disciplines is just who I am. I can't help but do that. And so I don't have music as an additional layer of that. It really is about three-dimensional form and oftentimes two-dimensional form or color and light. But for you, I think that it is music because you talked about a rhythm of a room in a way that I've never heard before. And I was like, is he talking about column bays or what is he talking about? And I don't think you are. I think you're talking about something else.
But I am also.
Yeah, but
the
something
thing is, but I am also.
But you're not like, you don't take a song and go like a 2/3 measure or something. And then like, that means the columns space themselves out.
Sometimes, yes, but not always.
So what's the not always, I think is what I'm interested in, because that's a clear translation that all of us can understand, or we, the John Cage and the pause, and like there's the same 10 references that always get made as ways for us to understand that. But there's something else that you're talking about that's essence is not the right word, right? But you're talking about some kind of energy or spirit as well that has a mood, or I don't know what. There's something that difference from that room to this room in this space, in this time, in that context, with this culture, like all of those things you're aware of as media.
I think my DJ brain moves between those spaces that I overlap all of those things. And so, yes, I can measure it out. So there's a lot of pieces that I actually physically measure. Okay, it's this many inches per beat because I'm working with musicians, or it's this many feet per bar. And then it also has a spiritual reference that we know that 7, if it's going to be 7 feet, we talking about Yamaya. If it's 5 feet, we talking Oshun. If it's 3 feet or in intersections, we talking about Legua and Lucero and all these things. But all these things are what we all occupy. This is space we all occupy all the time. So we shouldn't necessarily separate those things, I don't think. So I appreciate the question, but I kind of just overlay all those things all the time. And the skill of overlapping is in the one sense, it is that DJ approach to things, but it's also, it speaks to, I mean, who is the guy who wrote The Boys?
Yeah, the double consciousness.
The double consciousness that Olalekan Jeffus did a great work, like his piece of double consciousness that we all experience, but it's very specific and it is a skill. When we talk about being able to speak in different languages, just by virtue of being of African descent in a lot of different flavors, me, myself, I know a lot of different languages. I am polyglot a lot, all the time. So this ability to overlap and collage these conversations is also, it's just one of those things. And I think that everyone, whoever is on this, on this Zoom, could also start to think about what are the languages that, the spaces that we occupy and the languages that we speak, and what are those rhythms. So I like to use as a tool, DJing, how do we combine these things and what is that collage? What is that collage? What is that? How do we sew these things together?
So maybe I can bring in another question here.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Cousin. Thank you.
I know
that.
Maybe Michael, I think, had a question here. Michael Speaks. Did you want to jump in?
Hey, Sekou. Hey, Nate. How are you?
Hey.
You realize once your video didn't work, you actually got a lot more people joined. So we like you. We like you better than the technology.
They're lucky. You don't even know I was about to get in a lot of trouble with the school. If I can set it up again, I will get fired like today.
No, we don't need the technology. We actually, I have to say, you could have just showed the images. I just wanted to see a steady stream of more of those images. I mean, they're very powerful. There's also, I would just, one thing, maybe this is back to a question Amanda was raising, related to it at least. You were talking, as you were looking around the room that you're in, about architectural and three-dimensional space, but you were at the same time talking about, I think, the space of those two-dimensional paintings. And I know at the same time you were also talking about the space and the rhythms and syncopation in music. I'm not asking you to like sort of separate those, but I wonder, especially because I love the 2D stuff so much. I love the images. I'm just wondering, how do you think about space in those? I mean, they are obviously very thick and heavy with meaning. They also are collaged and stacked and interwoven. There's a lot happening in them. But how does, I'm just curious, when you talk about space in those two-dimensional pieces, what are you getting at? What are you talking about?
So just as a starting point, I know that these things are two-dimensional representations, which is part and parcel of how we represent and how we talk about architecture, right? We look at plans, we look at sections. I can't send a project to get built to the city without sending something that's two-dimensional. So we're already at an understanding of abstraction, just as a starting point. The things that I abstract go beyond the plan and section. I'm looking at likely 4 dimensions. And that's a conversation that I started to have last summer when I had the benefit of a residency at Baraka which is a great institute. I want everyone to check them out. But Institute for Three-Dimensional Experimental Design. The guy who runs it, Onid Kardash, who is like now one of my hugest mentors, does not believe in two-dimensional design, and he's always looking to the fourth dimension. And so there's three-dimensional design, and then there's also how do we infuse spirit, or where's the spirit that's already infused in the thing? The way that I've been drawing these things up are in some ways very two-dimensional in the way that you experience them, or will be two-dimensional, but there's usually a perspectival element to the work that I do. If we go back to one of the ones, maybe I could show you, but I'm not sure. Let me see if I can find something, but there's always something that's perspectival. So while it is layered, it's quite layered. The layers do speak to dimensions and the placement of everything. The placement, color, numerology, the rhythm of spaces speak to that fourth dimension. But I do see these as potential sections and plans. I don't really separate.
Yeah, maybe let me try this slightly differently. I guess in a way, I'm just wondering, looking at the one, well, we saw maybe 10 or 15. I'm just wondering to what extent the images you're showing are really not representational, but are in and of themselves things, which is to say that they're not representations of space. They have a space. They have a rhythm. They have a space. They have a linearity. They have so. I mean, yeah.
There are things I would love to hear you finish what you were saying. I do have a thought, but I want to hear you. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Yeah, no. I just no. I think I'd said really what I wanted to say, which is that I think we can look at those incredibly dense images as representations of a condition and perhaps even of a space, but they seem to ask not to be seen simply as representation, but to have themselves a space and a linearity and a rhythm. So they're not representational. They're not necessarily abstract. They are in and of themselves something. That's what, yeah.
So most of the pieces that you've seen are moments within sequences, and they range from like, I don't know, like 15 to 80 feet long series. A lot of them have a space that they are, or moment that they're occupying. When I'm working with DJs and musicians or storytellers, when we're doing videos, there's a specific space that they're also occupying. When I'm using this to generate architecture, there's an understanding that these are things that can be extracted, extruded, and become plan section elevation. And so I do sometimes, like there's some of the pieces I believe are not, I think they flatten in time in ways that are non-architectural, but I believe that there's still layers that can be extruded in general. I think the layers is a part of a continuity that I'm trying to speak to architecturally.
So let me see if I can get one or two more questions in here before everybody starts leaving. I think Larry Davis had a couple of questions. Did you want to ask them live, Larry, or should I just read them out?
Yeah. I was interested in your conversation between you two about the relationship between, or the utility of abstraction. You said, Nathan, that you actually appreciated it, whereas I think Sekou, you were sort of, maybe criticizing it, which is, understandable. I think that there's an interesting thing about abstraction and geometry, that it seems to cross cultures, that a lot of cultures use it as a way of organizing images, space and form and all that kind of thing. Yet at the same time, you know, figuration and texture become a kind of culturally specific thing that are, you know, embedded in various kinds of myths and things like that. And so I was just wondering, you know, what your take on all that was, because it was a kind of interesting moment in the dialogue between you two that that triggered this kind of thought in my mind.
I think it's a great question to talk about texture and how that gets layered and what that means. And how texture and materiality starts to speak towards location. And so with my approach of kind of sampling and layering and repeating and finding the rhythms of the space, that the specific materiality of any given site becomes critical, that's part of the conversation.
But I guess, you know, is there something is there some part of composition, design, organization, for lack of a better term, that is cross-cultural, or is everything really culturally specific? You know what I'm saying?
I don't see what is not cross-cultural. So you need to be a little more specific in the question. It's very difficult to not be cross-cultural right now.
Well, right now, but I'm saying maybe even in ancient culture, you know, that many cultures used geometry, the same geometry, to organize, let's say, sacred spaces, or organize even domestic spaces in certain ways, like, and that there's something about that, and it goes back to sort of learning about architecture, and this is why I'm asking the question, that would be kind of useful, if you will, to understand how, let's say, geometry, pattern, things like that can be a good thing to know, but then one could apply it more specifically to different cultures.
I think it's a good thing for everyone to have an approach and attitude towards the question that you just asked. But I think we also know, actually, I'm going to just walk this backwards from my research. How I'll walk it backwards is Veve, Pati Pemba, Ponto Escal. These are images that mark space and mark architectural and spiritual space, right? When we look at the way that people have moved through space, it's impossible to think of anything as an island. There's no, I don't know if you ever saw that movie with like the boy in the bubble with John Travolta, but there's no boy in the bubble. It doesn't exist. We have all interacted with each other. When I'm in Syracuse, the amazing stories of Syracuse and the ways that, for the studio that I'm teaching right now, we're talking about different people that came to, I guess, between 1897 and 1930 or 1918 during the Northern Migration to come to Syracuse, and then how that changed and shifted with Pioneer Homes that became another conglomerate of people that were from the South, from the East, and from the West. That there's a collage that happens there. And then the disruption of that with ID1 that happened in 1957 or 58, I believe, that's now about to be destroyed. There's a continual collage and language and collage of languages, or I could look at, or we could talk about specifically. I mean, I show a lot in Singapore, and that has to do with the Han and Malay and Indonesian peoples that are a mix. That's all a collage. There's an understanding of, there's an overlap and overlay. Or we could look at Via Maya and Via Maya in Dominican Republic, which is the Congos there are really mostly, and Loisa, but they're mostly, it's Congo and it's also Yoruba, but there's this overlap and overlay of materiality and culture. And so when we start to look at these different overlays of what happens in these places, or like Suriname, that's like so much more Ghanaian influence, similar to Jamaica. And then you see that in the Netherlands. And if you don't know these things, you're not really kind of diving into what it really means to do architecture and to be involved with who you're working with and what who those people are and what they're layering in as well.
Nothing's in isolation.
Never. Never.
Thanks, Larry.
Got it. Thank
So
you.
Thank you.
Great work.
To wrap this up and to in the spirit of the lecture, in the spirit of the DJ and as we call it, the selecta in Jamaica, we're gonna have some toasts, some shout outs to people if they wanna come and have the last question they can. Amanda Williams, we were lucky to have come on.
We need a lot of blacka shout outs.
Yeah, Jenny Bantle's in the place. Nina Kujan is here. Lisa Chumley's here. Say what's up. I know Scott Ruff is in the house.
Literally.
Yeah. Hey, Jenny, what's up? And Lisa Chumley said, Peter was here earlier. Hansi Better Baraza was here earlier, had to take off.
Why y'all can't fix my video?
I know. I know Andres Hernandez is in the place. Shout out to him too.
Your sister, Sekou.
I called her out already, Nina Cook-John. That's all right. So any of you want the last word? Say a quick question for Nina.
I'm hoping Team AMM is there. I hope Alpacas are there. I hope Team Mango is there. I hope 905 is there. I hope DZF is there. I hope AJA, that team. All y'all.
All of them all out. Nice name.
All of them. Wait. Okay. No. So there's space for 2 more questions.
Okay. Great. So I think Isabella Restrepo had a question. Is she still here or she left? She had a question about the Close to the Edge exhibition at the beginning.
You should speak to that.
Talked about at the beginning. No, she was talking about your impressions of the exhibition. She was asking about your impressions of the exhibition and what you thought about your place in that.
Again, you should speak to that.
No, it's not my spot. I'll do that another time. The only other question I saw in here was about the relationship between music and architecture, which we covered already.
I hope everyone knows also in terms of music and architecture, I think it was Mozart did a bunch of pieces based on cathedral. So that's the European reference. But if we look traditionally towards rhythms of 3 and tempo and architecture and space, this is something that started from the things that I've been researching, definitely in the Yoruba, and then it in West Africa, in Nigeria, and then it happened again in Brazil. So there's no separation. There's never been a separation of time, space, and place. It just doesn't exist.
Got it. Exactly. We can't, and Amanda had me looking up synesthete. So I now have a better understanding of synesthete, and you definitely are one. And I think all of us as architects need to be in that space of not only defining ourselves through one discipline, but that we can reach out into art and music and dance and theater and really allow all those things to affect our practice.
It seems as a responsibility, because if I'm not designing a bio lab, I better know something about that and be informed by that.
Exactly.
In pandemic times, we all probably need to know about that.
Exactly. So thanks everybody. Thanks everybody
Thank
for
you.
coming out. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for your presentation, Nate. And have a good night, everyone. Thanks again.
Bless. Thank you.